Today we are going to do a restoration and repair video of an old Leatherman Surge. So this tool was already sent in for warranty relating to the pliers, and they said it basically was good enough. They weren't going to change it out. So I had a spare plier head and I figured we'd go ahead and replace it. On top of that, you're going to see some other issues that are going to come up during this repair. So let's go ahead and run through it. Now for this modification, you're going to need two T10 security Torx. I'll put a link to some down in the description. The pry tool that I'm using in the L orientation, which is important, you can see I'm palming the tool. That is made by Teal Designs. It's really neat little pry tool made in the United States. I'll put a link to that as well. I also am using some WD-40. This is a silicone-based lubricant, and I found that this one works very well. When it dries, it actually protects the steel, and this will rust, as you can see. Like Leathermans, they pick up surface rust even just sitting around. I could individually wipe each tool like I'm doing here, but I find that it's far easier to just give the tool a bath at the very end, and you'll see exactly what I mean by that when we get to it later on. Now right here, I found out something that I didn't expect. If you look inside the frame, the lock bar is missing. I'm not sure what happened here, but luckily I actually have two spare arms for an old Leatherman Surge, and they are different, so you definitely want to use the same frame design. So we go ahead and do that, and we're going to encounter another issue because I forgot all about the fact that I modified this particular frame, and you're going to find out exactly what happens in just a second. Now, something of note when it comes to the original Surge plier, the section with the inner tools, the pivots are actually locked in place. New Surge tools have a rotating pivot that does not have flat edge that locks it into the frame, but the old Surge does, so you only have to unscrew one of the two sides. And in this case, you can see which side it is, but it may not be consistent. I've actually had them have the screw on the opposite side for some reason, so it does happen. So just feel it out. If you feel it slipping on you, it's probably because you're spinning the pivot inside the frame. Go ahead and unscrew the other side. You should feel a constant resistance against the screwdriver, and that's going to tell you which side you should be unscrewing. Now you know someone's going to have a comment about this. My method for installing tools inside a Leatherman is very fiddly. I don't know why I like to do it this way, I just do. If I really wanted to do this on a regular basis, what I would do is get a screw that has the same threading as the pivot. I would then screw it in through the opposite side into the pivot itself. While it being a smaller diameter, all the tools can basically float around it, so I don't have to line everything up. So when I'm pulling the whole thing back through, I can just rotate the pivot until it locks in. The way I'm doing it here with the tweezers is fiddly, to say the least. It works for me and sort of is enjoyable because that's who I am, but it's not necessarily the best method. So just take that into consideration. If you're planning on doing this, find what works for you. This particular method is what works for me. Now, when you get a Leatherman Surge, you will notice that the scissor is on the same side as the serrated blade, but the pocket clip is on the reverse side. I never felt that that made much sense, so since we're not going to be sending this back in for warranty, I'm going to go ahead and put the scissor on the same arm as the straight blade. That way, with your bottom part of your hand, you can actually manipulate and open the scissors without having to flip the Surge to its other side. It just makes sense to have the scissors and the straight blade on the same arm. That's just my personal preference, because you cannot do that with the saw. That one you're going to have to use two hands for anyway. It's nice to have the straight blade and the scissor, both of which can be easily one-handed, be on the same side. Now right here, you're going to see that I'm going to start having some trouble. And what I noticed is sometimes when you have it fully closed like that, you're not going to be able to get the pivot in unless you open up the pliers just a little bit so that there's more area and the two sides are not touching each other. It's just a little something that you might run into, and this will help you get it done a little bit faster. So just keep that in mind. Another word of caution: when you're assembling the plier side pivot, make sure that the pivot is going all the way through and past the two copper washers. The problem I have encountered, and made this mistake many times, is I have flattened or crushed the edges of one of the copper washers because the pivot, I started screwing it down and it was basically deforming that washer. And luckily I have a ton of extras, but if you don't and you make this mistake, you're going to be in for a very bad day. So do yourself a favor and make sure that there's no resistance, that the actual pivot is going through everything before you start tightening things down. Get the screw in as far as you can and make sure that it's past the point of interacting with that washer so that you can then tighten it down without being afraid of actually crushing it. It's a big thing if you don't have spare parts. Now, you try to fix one thing and then you run into another problem. So in this particular frame, I had modified in the past because I was trying to make long tools fit. So I had to remove the stop bar that keeps the plier head from getting locked into the small implements. Now, what I end up having to do, and I figure out, is that I can bend the piece that's currently left in the frame over enough that it actually interacts with the plier head and stops it from getting stuck in the bit holder section. So it's not ideal. I try to use tweezers here, which is really dumb. It doesn't work particularly well. I think it's particularly funny that a pry bar, which was the perfect tool, is sitting right next to it. I figured this out very quickly, and then I'm able to fix it in just a couple of seconds. This worked. It's not perfect, but it solved my problem without having to potentially find another plier arm. So I'm satisfied, at least with this solution. So something comes up, sometimes you have to improvise. Now, in this case, I did not bother adding blue Loctite to anything. In the case of the smaller implements, the pivots lock in place. It really isn't necessary. And on the plier side, there was enough red Loctite left over. I was feeling it very tight already. It just isn't necessary. And red Loctite, after it breaks like that, it's basically the same level as the blue Loctite. And I don't think you have to do much more. Now, what I'm going to do here, like you see, is I give it a bath in the WD-40. And that, when I transfer it, when I send it to my friend, it's going to sit in that mixture for, 3 or 4 days. So more than enough time for all of that spotting to get released. So all you have to do then is just wipe it down. Just the act of wiping it's going to remove a lot of the rust, the surface rust. And the WD-40 itself is actually going to leave a protecting layer on the steel in places that it probably wouldn't be able to get into were it not for the fact that it's been sitting in it. So this is going to get into the plier head. It's going to get into the small areas that I can't otherwise do. So this works really well. I just double layer some Ziplocs, and yeah, that's it. Easy peasy. Thanks for watching. Like I said, I will put a link to everything I use down below. And you guys have a great day.